Good afternoon, everybody. It is such a joy to have you here for our final live learning session for the year. We've had 6 of these so far. This is our 7th, and we're in for a cracker today, talking about one of my favorite subjects, joy, and particularly how do we bring this into the classroom. And before we kick off, just a couple of little administrative elements. So we will be recording today's session. So if that's a concern to you, then just leave your camera switched off so that we don't see your beautiful face lighting up our screen. And in order to get the best experience, if you click down into the little arrow next to your video icon in the bottom left-hand corner and click into your video settings, you'll be able to select the little button that says hide non-video participants. And if you click this button, it means that you, at the moment, you'll just have me on screen and you won't see all of the other participants in gallery view that don't have their cameras on. So it can certainly help with your experience to do that. As we kick off today, I just want to start in a place that I always do. And those, I can see some familiar faces in the room today who are quite familiar with the way that I love to do an acknowledgement of country. And I thought I might change it up a little bit today. Normally I start by showing a map of Australia and then showing a map of our Indigenous Australia and sort of acknowledging the gap in time that exists between when we see the first map and when we see the second map. But I thought I might actually kind of dig into something a little bit more personal for today's acknowledgement of country by sharing this. And some of you who've been on Zoom with me before may have seen it hiding up in the bookshelves previously. But this is a piece of artwork that was completed by a student that I taught a number of years ago. And about 4 or 5 years after she graduated, we caught up for a coffee and she gifted this piece of artwork to me. And I wanted to read the back to you about what this picture represents for her as a young Indigenous person. And so this is from Kiri Fabilla. So she's a proud descendant of the Jabra Jabra tribe from the Kimberley in Western Australia. And for her, this painting represents the sharing of land and its abundant resources shared by people and animals, with the waterhole being the prominent resource in this piece. There are 3 women sitting by the waterhole at a meeting place, symbolizing cultural connection to each other and their care for the land. The background symbolizes the dream time and how our ancestors have been looking after the land and its precious resources for thousands of generations, passing down traditions for over 60,000 years. This is a reminder that we in the 21st century must continue the culture of caring for the land that we live in, acknowledging the custodians of the land who were here before us, regardless of our own ancestral background. I want to start with this piece because today I think we're going to talk about something that really digs into the history and the culture of the lands in which we live and learn. And in showing this, I want to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'm coming to you from Brisbane on Yagara and Turrbal land. And I'd love for you to drop in the chat conversation wherever you're coming from and acknowledge the First Nations people of the land that you come to us from. But the reason I share this is this piece of work came from a young person who found joy through her Indigenous heritage and found an artistic and a creative outlet through that in order to share. And I think today I really want to dig into particularly how do we create learning experiences for our young people that build that creative connection and that sense of joy in their learning content, just like Kiri found through her learning experiences and then the beautiful gift of giving that piece of art to me. I'm super excited to introduce our guest for today. This particular individual is a person that I've certainly been a fan of for a really long time and can say has been instrumental in my own journey of looking at how we can redesign learning so that it's in the best interest of young people and educators and looks towards the future, I think, of education. So I'm going to invite Jojo on screen. Joanne McEachen, welcome to our 7th live learning, coming to us with a little bit of jet lag after an international trip. So thank you for joining us. I won't read your bio, but I would love for you to introduce a little bit of you and maybe in the essence of joy, which is what we're sort of nailing today's conversation around. What's some work that's bringing you joy at the moment?
Mm. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, ko Joanne McEachen tuku ingoa, ko ngā tahu te iwi. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It's just an absolute pleasure to be here. I just introduced myself to you in Māori, and I'm from Ngāi Tahu, and that's the South Island tribe from the land of Te Waipunami, which is the South Island of New Zealand. And I'm talking to you from Te Waipunami this afternoon or this evening. And that's given me an incredible amount of joy right now because I've just landed in from a 51-hour trip coming back from the United States to get here. And the reason I had to do that was because I had to go and I'm taking part in a self-isolation pilot for COVID and for business travellers. So I came back, and the only direct flight to come to Aotearoa Christchurch is via Singapore. So I had to go via Singapore to get back here to Aotearoa, New Zealand. So I'm a little bit tired, so I'll be a little bit slow possibly at some times, but I'll get excited. And once I get started talking or having a kōrero with you, I will be able to get some joy going. But what's bringing me joy right now is that I've got an opportunity to spend time with my own tribal people and on my own land. And you talked a little bit, Nick, at the beginning around how your discovery and your understanding about, where people are from and being on your land is so important. And for me, I spent sort of 10 years of my life in a year ago, 10 years before that, I spent living in the United States, working with a lot of different countries around sort of, system change and education. And during that time, I was floating. I didn't realize how much I was floating because I wasn't on my own tribal land, and I didn't really understand that what that meant. And so to come home, to come back to my own tribe, and to be with my people has brought me great joy, and to be with my family, with my friends, and to be with people who really genuinely understand who I am, where I am from, and actually understand my accent has been quite incredible. But also just that sense of learning about what really matters in education and the recognition that a lot of my writing, a lot of my learning has come from my tupuna, my ancestors, and the remembrance of that, and recognizing that is in my cellular memory and my cellular structure. And I think when you're working with Indigenous people, it's the understanding of that, and that bringing that knowledge and experience and joy to our learning has been hugely incredible to me, and to recognize that that's where it's come from. A lot of my life I was brought up to live in the Pakeha or the white world, and to really understand that a lot of my knowledge has been gifted to me through my ancestors. That's been hugely joyful and hugely rewarding and quite fascinating. So I'm slowly understanding who I am, where I come from, and what that has meant to me. And my gift to the world has been to be able to share that with everybody and to recognize where that's come from. Because sometimes when I've been writing, I didn't always know, how did I know that, or where did it come from? And so for me, this has been a very spiritual journey into knowing myself through my Māori ancestry and through my knowledge of who I am. So for me, it's just been a beautiful time, and what joy that's been giving. So it's just like, it's an honor, and thank you for letting me say that. So it's exciting.
No, thank you. I want to dig into Jojo as a young person. Let's go back, let's go back a little bit. And when I was like doing some reading before we jumped on today, I genuinely had a moment of realization when I looked at a piece that you'd written and found that your middle name is actually Joy. And I had no idea when I reached out to you and said, hey, for our last live learning of the year, I want to talk about joy. And then when I read that piece, I was like, it was totally meant to be, the fact that you're the person that we're sort of unpacking this with. But you
Ah,
told a little bit of
yeah.
a story about that experience, I guess, and we've all got one of those stories of young people,
Yeah.
and kind of navigating those social interactions from an early age. But tell me a little bit more about you as a learner. What was school like for you? Where did you find your joy as a young person in school? And what have you captured and taken with you into your adult self, I guess, from your childlike self as a learner?
Yeah, I think I was one of those kids that was so incredibly annoying because I asked questions all of the time. And you hear research about how when you're a little kid, you ask a lot of questions and then you stop asking questions as you get older. I never have, and I still am so excited and interested in to find out why and why people do things and how did they learn that and where did they get that from and why did they do that and where does that come from? And I think that if we lose our inquisitiveness or we lose our desire to learn about other people, that's where we fall over. And so for me as a little kid, I was always fascinated. And I think I wrote a blog once about a question that I asked my mum. I said to her when I was 4 years old, I said, so imagine if we were living inside a giant's thumb and we were a universe inside a universe inside a universe inside a universe. Imagine if that was possible and we were just like a whole lot of little atoms. I didn't know the word atoms at that stage. But what I was fascinated with was that's possible. And she never ever told me it wasn't. She always said, why don't you keep dreaming that? And so for me, that gave me the opportunity to keep dreaming and keep believing that there were things that were possible that weren't probably really possible, but could be. So she gave me that opportunity. At school, that didn't necessarily happen to me. But what I was able to learn to do was to keep dreaming in my mind and keep dreaming while I was looking at the teacher and they were telling me other things to think about. So I learned how to switch off and I learned how to be good. I learned how to be a really good girl at school, which a lot of our girls can do really well. And I really hate saying that, but that's what happened to me. So I went through school. I was never an A student. I was always your classic C or B student, and I just got through by the skin of my teeth. But what I did was I dreamed in my head and I thought about what could be, and I always just did the minimum to get through. And that's why I'm so passionate about making school exciting, because it was such a waste of time for me. I actually think I was quite bright at that time. I didn't know I was, but I was told I wasn't that bright. And actually, I came through and my IQ, when you did the IQ test, was really high. And so there was always this discrepancy as to why isn't she performing very well. But it was because I was always really interested in other things. But my parents knew I was bright because my dad was a principal, my mother was an early childhood teacher, 7 of us in our family, and 5 of us all became teachers. So what do we talk about? Education. None of us could get a word in edgewise because we're always right and we're always talking about education. But the problem was that what I did at school was never interesting for me. I was never engaged because they gave me stuff that I wasn't excited about. And so I would look at the teacher, I'd answer the teacher, but in my head I was thinking about something else. So I learned about that really big important word, engagement. Like, get kids excited about what they want to learn about. You give me something that I want to learn about and I will not stop doing it for about 20 hours in a row, and you can't take me away from it. And that's what I see with kids. And so when kids get that, then that's when joy comes. When you start to do something and you love it, that's when you get excited. That's when you become passionate, and that's when learning occurs. If I have to do something that I really dislike doing, I don't get excited. So we have to find ways to make joy occur. We have to find ways to do that. And what I've found is that if we do it through figuring out who are we and what do we like. It took me till I was a grown up to learn what I liked, because I was never allowed to figure it out at school. And I think that's a waste of time. I didn't learn how to connect with other people except through my own family and my own world. Imagine if we could learn to connect with all of these different things that are going on in the world at school. Like, make connections with other learning opportunities, other businesses, other things that are going on in the world, other cultures, all of the stuff in a real way, that was in a way that kids wanted to learn about it. So those are the things I wanted to get to do when I became a teacher and became a school leader. That's what I wanted to see happen. And that creates joy.
I think you and I probably had a very similar growing up experience. I think in school, I was the eldest of five, and I would describe myself as compliant as a
Yeah,
young
yeah,
person.
yeah.
And I think sometimes we mistake in the classroom the difference between compliance and engagement,
Yes.
because there's a big portion of our young people that are
Yeah.
very good at looking engaged,
Yep.
but in reality, it's just compliant behavior.
Yeah.
Um, I want to dig into a couple of things that you said then. I love that comment, like keep dreaming that. And maybe I want to sit here. I feel like, and we know that the data is there, the enjoyment that young people have in school plummets from year one through to year 10. We see like a 95% love of school in that year one space. And by the time they reach year 10, it's sub 50%, dropping down to 30% or lower. Um, how do we create learning experiences that actually maintain that love of school and that sense of dreaming in the classroom? What does that look like in the way that we curate or create learning in the classroom? Because I feel like a lot of the time we get so bound by delivering the curriculum that sometimes we don't allow the space for the learning to breathe. And it's the breathing in the curriculum that creates that joy and engagement. How do we
Yeah.
battle those two things, allowing space for dreaming and this overwhelming sense to deliver the curriculum in the classroom?
Well, the first thing I think is to recognize that none of us are the same. and that a curriculum has to be personal, not necessarily personalized, but it has to be personal to the learner, because otherwise it's not real. It doesn't make any sense to them. So for me, it's about like taking. So I mean, any single thing you have in a curriculum is totally easy to make personal, if you think about what is the concept you're trying to teach. So if you have a standard that you're trying to teach, you can make it really you just make it personal. I had an example where a teacher was trying to say to me, I've got to teach something about ratio. And she said, I can't do it. I can't make it personal to any kid in the classroom. And I said, well, you do. I have what I call an interview that I ask teachers to do with children to learn who they are. Because when you know a child, you can make something personal. But teachers feel they don't have time, or they don't feel they've been given time to learn who to learn who a child is. But once you know a child, then you can make something personal. So the teacher, I ask teachers to interview the children, find out what they love, and then they can make some connections to make the curriculum personal. Once the teacher did this interview with the child, the child loved geckos or lizards or something, and so I said, off the top of my head, I said, well, why don't you do the ratio of how many times do you have to see a gecko to be frightened? Something like that. And the kid loved it. So then they had geckos all over the classroom, and next thing they'd find how many times did you see one before you got frightened? So you do things like that just actually bring it to life. I mean, how simple is that? Like, that's a one tiny little example. I'm not trying to make it really simple, but I'm just saying that you just have to have a connection, a simple connection, to make it real for that learner, so that they can get excited, find some joy, and then that kid will never forget what a ratio is ever again. How many did it take to make it work, to make the kids frightened? And it was around the Halloween time or whatever it was. But I mean, it's simple, so simple, something like that. The other part that we do is that we kill design because we think everybody has to learn exactly the same way. Figure out a way for each child to learn it in their own way. And then the other part that I think is really exciting around this is to think about assessment. Now, I talk about authentic mixed method assessment, and people just about fall off their chairs with it, because it's actually very simple to do. If you're thinking about authentic assessment, it's really children can show us what they know in their way. That is what creates equity. Authentic mixed method assessment is taking what kids already have to do for assessment. Yes, you can still do that, because you have to follow what states expect you to do. I'm not saying don't do that. And people say to me all the time that you're trying to say you don't have to follow the rules. Well, actually we do sometimes, until we can get to a new system. But then ask the children to show you in their way first too. Give children a break. We're not here to be mean to them. We're wanting to give them an opportunity to show who they are in their way first. And then add that to the list of things they can show you in the way that they choose to. For me, it's about equity. It's about giving kids a chance to be themselves and to show what they know in their way first. And then they can do it in the way that we ask them to do it, in the adult way, in the adult version. I have a phrase going hunting for evidence for kids, and then let them show you what they want to show, and let them show you in their way too. Authentic mixed method assessment is quite simple. When you're setting up a design of a lesson, when kids you've shown them what you want to learn, then say to them, how would you be able to show me that you would learn that? Then talk to the other teachers, do a moderation, say, has that been acceptable? Is that a good way of showing it? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Have they shown that? Have they not shown that? And you can do that at the beginning, so you're all clear about what the expectations are, that you might have a guiding rubric, something like that, so you're not going off course, so everybody has an agreement, so it meets the standards, so you're very clear. And then at the very end of the unit, you've said, yes, we all agreed that they were met. Because I think there's a feeling that sometimes we're not meeting the standards if we give kids a choice. Now, to me, there's two things that are a problem with that. One is that fairness. When we use the word fairness for education, that really upsets me, because we're being unfair when we make every child do the same thing. Because that would be like saying, let's be fair, if we all have to wear glasses, you might as well wear the same as mine. Because they're really, we have to be fair, so we all have to be the same. Or if we're being equitable, then it's let's all find the right pair of glasses for each child. Same with lesson design. Let's find the right lesson for this particular child. Let's find the right assessment. And then the big overriding elephant in the room, Nick, is why do we have to do that? Why do we have to have everyone do the same learning? Are you the same as me? Am I the same as you? I mean, when did we get to the point where we have to do this? And that's the big chewy question that I'm working on at the moment. And, I think that coming up with an assessment system that is big enough to satisfy everybody is going to be really challenging. We have to make learning personal, and we have to accept that we each have our own pathway, and that we're all going to be able to contribute to our world by doing what we can do. Now, each person is an individual, and we all have an ability to contribute, and that might be just getting out of bed in the morning and being able to do something. It might be saving the ocean. It might be contributing to the world as an educator. It might be making food for somebody. And when we start to think about it, that each human has the opportunity to do that, then that's when we shift our education system.
Hmm. I so many things that I could dig into now. I think, when you and I connected over that article I wrote, it was around a Romeo and Juliet unit that I constructed. And it's super curious because obviously Shakespeare is attached to this traditional model of education. And what we had students do was we took that theme of how an action or an inability to take action results in change regardless. And the mission for the students was just to find a way to show me that either making a decision or not making a decision still resulted in an outcome, irrespective of whether you did nothing or you did something. And this was year 10, it was an extension English class, and the young people produced everything from a Draw My Life that kind of mapped 3 generations of their family and how they'd arrived to be where they were. And there were small micro moments like, their grandparents meeting at a gathering that they were both not supposed to be at, and they found each other. And then obviously that resulted in, that individual being where they were. Or another young person who created like a humans of episode where she took, 100 and something photos of different people in the community and kind of told a story underneath that photo of how a decision had affected their life. I had 2 boys who were the bane of my existence in the class, who created this like 15-minute mockumentary around this condition that they'd named IDM, which was immature decision making. And they'd gone and researched like the biology of like brain development, and then ascertained that anybody under the age of 25 was like a sufferer of IDM. So they dressed up their friends as like Miley Cyrus, who was a famous sufferer of IDM. They dressed up another friend as a doctor. And I remember sitting at my kitchen bench marking, and I was watching one piece after another. And there were more traditional texts that were produced, like short stories and analytical essays. There was everything on the spectrum of production. But one thing that struck me is as I sat there marking, I was laughing, like quite uproariously, so much so that my housemate, who was also a teacher at the time, pulled me aside and went, "Nick, what are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, I'm marking." And she kind of at that point thought I'd had one too many wines while I was working. And I said, I'm having so much fun. These young people have brought so much of themselves to this assessment task that this is such a joy for me to mark. And so I think one of the challenges when we talk about that mixed method authentic assessment is that, some of our teachers become fearful that by creating that space that there's going to be more marking attached to it, or that it's going to be harder to ascertain the levels between one student or another. How would you speak to those teachers that have a degree of reservation because there's security in seeing one task that looks the same being measured against another task that looks the same? How do we debunk the myth that that's the only way to create equity and that's the only way to potentially reduce workload for teachers or create some sort of workload equity as well? How do we address those 2 elements?
I think that that you're raising a really, really good point, and that I think that there's probably 3 things I'd like to say about that. The first one is that thank you very much for doing that, and thank you for writing about it, because that's the reason why I connected with you, and I really loved that story. And that's a really good story because it gives us a whole lot of information around it. One, that it's possible to do, and 2, that you can take a very traditional way of thinking about a teaching unit and create multiple ways of assessing it. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. And that whenever we work with schools, what we're doing is showing them that those are the opportunities to do that. A traditional teacher finds it very challenging to come up with those, so what we're looking for are lots of different ways to show that. So thank you for doing that. The second question is, right, how do we actually describe what success looks like? So the first thing that we do when we go into any school to work with them is we say to them, what does success look like in your school? And then once we've done that, we say, what would it look like for the children to do that? And then what we can do is write a continuum to help describe what success looks like. Now you can call that a rubric, you can call it a learning progression, or you can call it a mini rubric, you can call it a description of success, whatever is comfortable for you. And so what we do is we describe what would that look like, and then what would be some ways we would know. To start with, I always go really small. So you'd take your regular unit of work, you'd have your standards, you'd have your normal ways of assessing, and then I'd say, let's add one more way of knowing. And let's add that, maybe it's the teachers themselves who decide that, and then that adds one more way, and then we offer that to the kids. That's the first unit of work. Next time we do it, we discuss, how did that go? What did it feel like? Was it okay? Did it work? What did we learn from that? If it worked, great. If it didn't work, why didn't it work? Let's have another look. Then the next time we do another unit, let's add another piece, and maybe we'll ask the kids this time, could we come up with a different way of showing what we know? Have you got an idea? Okay, so then maybe the next time, and then we review that and see, did that work, did that not work? Then maybe the next time, if we want to go another step further, let's add two different ones, one the teachers come up with, one the kids come up with. And then let's add a third option. Okay, next time let's do it an open one where the teachers might come up with a way and the kids might come up with a way. So you might have 3 or 4 different ways of showing what you know. So what you're doing is you're building the capacity of your school teachers as you're going through the process. Now, I talk about we don't have to be in a hurry to do this because we've had, 100 years of teaching and learning in the same way. So let's go step by step by step by step and do it as we go, because I mean, my brain isn't that big and I can only do one thing at a time. So like my methodology is always, let's manage things one step at a time, because it's too hard to do everything at once. I can't. And so I go one step at a time. And as we do instructions for kids, we don't give everything and say, okay, let's go and research something and say it's free for all. We learned when I was, we learned how to do that step by step by step. We have to give, help. We do, we don't just go free for all for anything. We do one thing at a time. So that's my way of doing it. And we check in with each other. How does it feel? Is it working? Does it make sense to the kids? Does it make sense to me? Does it make sense to the parents? And we do it together as a collective, as a group. And we all have to say to ourselves, does it make sense? And if it's not comfortable for me and I don't like doing it, what am I going to do differently? Or if the rest of the school's doing it and I'm the one teacher who's not doing it, I have to think about, is this going to work for me or not? Some teachers are going to go into a different school because it just doesn't make sense for them. And if you're a traditional teacher and it's working for you and your kids that you're teaching, then why would you change? So we also have to be cognizant of our teachers, that for some teachers, the way they've always taught is working for their kids. And I know some teachers that it does, and I would never touch them. Some, we need to help them to move on to a different way of teaching and learning, and that's okay too. So again, just as much as we think about our kids as personalising it for our kids or making it personal, again for the teachers too. And they are human, and their well-being is so stretched right now. It's exactly the same what I would do with kids. I think about what do we need to do to help them to manage what they're going through. They're thrown up in the air just as much as kids are and just as much as we are. So we have to do this together and be gentle with each other and think about how do we progress as a group of human beings to make our world a better place. And a lot of the work I talk about is I've developed contributive learning, where we're really thinking about how do we all contribute together, and that includes not blaming teachers, not blaming kids, not blaming anyone, but thinking about how do we do this together to make it okay.
I love that. I want to dig into that phrase, ways of knowing, because I think as a classroom teacher, sometimes we can be a little bit linear in the options that we have in front of us around ways of knowing. So for a teacher who's listening right now, what are some more diverse ways of knowing that we can introduce into the classroom to maybe support our young people to show us different things?
Yeah. Oh, there's to me it's about becoming practical. So for me, it's about the real application. So if you can I talk about often, I've written some blogs about too, which I can share with you as well, about getting out of the classroom, getting out of the school and going into the real world. So I've got 4 outcomes that I talk about with the contributive curriculum. The first one is self-understanding. Know who you are, how you fit into the world, and how you can contribute to humanity. Now, you can't do that just by yourself. You have to connect to other people and do something together. The second one is around connection. How do you connect to yourself, your family, your community, your school, your land, your people, and your wider world, and to your purpose for being? Now, to do that, you need other people as well. The next one is knowledge. What's the knowledge you need as an individual? What's the knowledge you need for you to be you and to connect to this world and to contribute? And that's your curriculum. And that's your personal curriculum, which is from the Australian curriculum or the New Zealand curriculum, or wherever you are listening to this. And then the last one is around your competencies. What are those competencies you need to learn and return to humanity? So that could be your, things like critical thinking, things like communication, things like, those basic global competencies that we all need to have. So through those things, I think about how are we going to show that we have those, and that's connecting those all together. So think about how could you do that in a way that involves everybody in your community. So you might decide that there's a problem in your community that you might want to solve together. So therefore, is the real problem being solved? That's when you start to see that's part of an assessment. So it might be micro assessments. It might be a little step by step by step, which you discuss and you do, as I said earlier, piece by piece by piece at a time. Or it might be a big chunk, like did the problem get solved? Or it might be looking at things like, a speech, doing a blog, or doing, things that are, I've got a list which I'll send through to you of things. We've got about 200 different ideas for different sorts of assessments, which move away from the traditional ways of knowing things. It might be an interview. It might be somebody else telling you that you've been able to do something for them. It might be a way that you've contributed to somebody else's life. It might be a shift in the way you think about yourself. It might be that you've understood where you've come from. It might be that you've learned a new piece of your language. It might be that you've found out about and shared with somebody else a way of doing something new. It might be that you've learned how to spend your money better. It might be that you've, a whole range of different things that you've been able to set a goal for yourself. It may be that you've been able to show and solve a problem and taught somebody else how to do that. You can come up with a zillion different ideas if you allow yourself the freedom to do that. But when we stay within a single line of knowingness, and we believe that there's only one way of showing that, we really limit it. And I know that when I think about it from my Indigenous ways of knowing, I think, one of the good examples I often use is, we overprivilege certain ways of knowing. And that's so dangerous. And I think about, like, as a Māori woman, I would go down to the river in the traditional ways of knowing, and I would sit by the river and I would listen. If I couldn't hear certain birds, I would know something's wrong with the water and I probably wouldn't get my fish there that day. But if I was a Pākehara white woman going down to listen to, or going down to check the water, I'd take a test tube and I'd take it back to the lab and I'd test it and see did it have certain chemicals in it. Now, neither way is wrong. Neither way is wrong. So let me be really clear with that. Neither way is wrong, and neither way is 100% right either. But what we've done in the last 100 years or 150 years is we've overprivileged the Pākehara or the white way of doing it, not the Indigenous way. Yet both have value and both have the same level of knowledge. But we haven't given the privilege to any other sort of ways of knowing. And I think what we need to do is to allow other ways of knowing to be getting a little bit of that privilege.
I think what you speak to as well is a place where we give teachers the freedom and the space and the support to really understand, like, the curriculum that they're delivering. I find that the schools that I walk into, they get really bound by content descriptors and by all of this periphery content rather than digging into, at the core of the achievement standard, what is the knowing that I need to get across, and then distilling that down into all of the possibilities that sits within that. And so when I have conversations with schools and they're like, oh, our system is broken, and I'm like, there are elements of our system that needs a radical shift. But some of the knowing that sits within the achievement standards, those aren't broken. It's the way that we've privileged certain ways of knowing underneath that is broken. But in order to do that, we need the permission as educators to play, I think, in that space.
And lots of the time you do have permission. And I'll say that again, a lot of the time you do have permission. The curriculum gives you permission to do exactly what I'm saying. So I challenge you to think about, where does that permission stop? And is it your own self? Is it your school? Is it your system leaders? Where is that permission stopping you do it? And a lot of the time when I work with schools, and in your system too, it's not the system. Sometimes it's what we believe the system to say. And the other thing I would like to say is, where does the system come from? Who is the system? The system is us. The system is humans. So I think, we are all got to talk to each other to figure out what does that mean. And I would really like to push on what you said, Nick, and say that actually those standards have got some really good things in them that we want our kids to learn. And if we can teach them in the way that privileges the knowledge that they need, then we've got huge opportunity to be able to do this with them. And there's not really a lot in there that I wouldn't want them to learn. I probably would want them to learn a lot of what's in the curriculum. It's the permission that we have to give ourselves. And sometimes I laugh because I work with a lot of country leaders, and I say to them, sometimes I feel like I'm a little fairy going around the world tapping you on the shoulder saying, you've got permission to do this. And I've got no right to do that. Like, I don't have a position to do that. But all I'm saying is that you've got permission in your own documents to do that. But where did we get to the stage where we're frightened to use our own documents to say we can do this? So I'm not sure where that's come from. And I think we've just got scared because we think we have to get it right. But what is right? What's right is what's right for kids and for humans. Not for those documents. Those documents shouldn't be what's right. What's right is us, humans. And we as humans wrote those.
I think it's a really fascinating place when I talk to teachers, because I think educators walk into like education and teaching almost as a vocation, right? So you're in there because you desperately want to do well by the young people in the classroom. And one thing that I throw into that space when teachers are experimenting with their curriculum and starting to play in this space and they're scared of getting it wrong, like, what if I stuff it up? What if I mess the children up? What if something bad happens? And for me, it's always come back to, if your intention wholeheartedly is to build a learning experience that cultivates good and greatness in the young people, you won't ever go wrong. If at the core of your design process, the young person sits in the center and their well-being, both as a learner and as a person, sits in the foundation of the build, then whatever happens after it is actually going to be okay. There won't be a negative ramification. But I do think that there's a complex, I'll go, No,
I was just going to say with the family piece, a lot of schools that I work with say they find it difficult to engage with families. And for that very reason you just described, is because they haven't connected with the families about what do they want, or they've asked the families what they want. And most families say, I want my children to be happy, I want them to be engaged, and I want them to be doing really well at school. And then we go and measure maths, science, social studies and reading. And we don't measure what's important to the families. And then or we ask the families what they want, and then we go and do something else. So we have to listen. We have to listen to what families want and then do that too. And I think that's probably, we've got a bit of a mismatch between what our society says they want and what we're actually doing in schools. Because every single parent meeting I have hosted in my life, they have said they want their kids to be happy, they want them to be successful, and they want them to do well at school. Not ever have they said, first of all, they want them to do well in maths, science, social studies and reading.
Yeah. And isn't it interesting as well, I think, to back up from that, the other frame that parents will use is, I want my child to be seen.
Yes.
I want my teacher to know my child. Yeah. And I think I wonder now, like, how much we create the space in order to know our young people first. I remember a mentor that I had a number of years ago in a role. I was really struggling with one particular student in my class, and I was trying to work out, we were constantly adversarial in the classroom, and it was impacting on the learning in the space. And I couldn't for the life of me extend beyond this culture that we've created between us. And this mentor of mine said to me, I want you for the next 2 weeks to go and find that individual at one of the breaks and just like find a way to ask them one question about what they've done in the last 24 hours on the weekend. And I remember saying to her, my gosh, I couldn't think of anything worse than spending more time with this individual, given the tension that was in the classroom.
Exactly.
But I trusted her. And I remember going and seeking out this young person, and I started with, so what did you get up to on the weekend? And he mentioned AFL. And then I shared that my dad is like a mad Collingwood fan, and it's his greatest disappointment that I don't support Collingwood, that I support Hawthorn. And I found, and the next day then we chatted, and he mentioned that he had training that afternoon. And then the next day we mentioned something else, and we started to collect knowing about each other that was outside of that classroom space. And I found straight away, as soon as we then walked back into the classroom, because as he walked in, I was able to ask him a question that was unrelated to the learning or the work. We were in a completely different frame of reference when the learning began. So I'm going to ask one question, and if anybody in the room wants to drop questions in the chat, feel free to, but I'm curious. One thing that I've reflected on in that is that young person, obviously, I think there was an element of not feeling safe in my classroom to be vulnerable in our learning space. And so by me connecting on a personal level, that then made learning possible for that young person. how tightly connected is that creation of joy in our classroom and these notions of like social emotional well-being and safety in the classroom, and how do we bring both of those things together?
It's almost 100%. I mean, I can't be, I can't be 100% sure about that, but it's nearly, my work is at the intersection of academic and well-being and social and emotional learning. You can call it well-being or social and emotional learning. To me, you can't do one without the other. Often our education system swings too far one way, swings too far the other way. To me, you can't do one without the other. So when I talk about work, where I work, I'm bang in the center. You have to have both if you're really going to have a healthy student. I mentioned earlier that I have an interview that we ask all teachers to work with any student that they work with. So whenever I do any work with schools, we ask teachers to choose one or two students to work with first. Usually the two students that they find the hardest to teach. Whoever they are, the hardest to teach, they personally find the hardest to teach. They do this interview with them. It takes half an hour, and their whole life changes. Their whole life changes through this interview, and it's exactly what you've just described. And I can send you a link through to how to get a hold of that interview, because that changes everything for them, because their relationship shifts, because they learn to connect as human beings, and they have, as you say, a whole different relationship. When you know somebody, you find it harder. When you don't know somebody, you've got no connection, you don't have any responsibility to teach them. When you know that child, your behavior shifts. Things I cannot tell you how many times teachers say to me, "I already know my kids. I don't need to do that. I already know my kids." Every single time I've done this with people, they say to me, "I can't believe how I didn't know my kids." And it breaks my heart every time, because we all assume we know each other. And I want to say the same thing about ourselves as teachers working together. We don't know each other either. So let's talk to each other as real human beings too, and learn to live with each other in our own spaces and care about each other again. Because when we know each other and care about each other and actually like each other again, kids see that. When I go into schools, when people ask me to come into schools because there's real bullying going on, I can guarantee you there's no love in the staff room. I can guarantee you there's difficulties going on with relationships with staff. I think one of the things that's really critical for me is that we all do the work. Every single one of those areas that I talked about, those 4 areas, I do that work with staff first, because we are all humans and we all need that engagement first. So for me, it's about that connection is 100% guaranteed. It's that relationship with our students first. It's that relationship with each other as adults. It's our relationship with our families and our communities. And it's about who are we, how do we fit into the world, and how can we each contribute our own special skills to that. And that's for each person, every single person in the school, every single person in our community. And then the next bit is, how do we connect together? How do we learn together? And then how do we use our competencies to lift together and create that environment where we can have joy every day, every single day. My mother said to me, she gave me some really good advice. Most of my life she gave me good advice. I didn't listen to all of it, and I wish I had. But she gave me some incredible advice. She said to me, "Jojo, you have to have a deep belly laugh every day." And I didn't understand that until, I was a grown up and maybe a little bit too old to really take the most out of that. But really, it's true. If you can't have a deep laugh every day, then there's something not going right. And I challenge everybody I meet to say, have you had a deep belly laugh today? And if not, why not? And when are you going to have one? And how can we all have one together? Like, create it together. And your staff, your kids, your friends, your family, let's laugh. And I can't tell you how she made me laugh every day, because it's revolting, because she took her teeth out. But it was just like that. You've got to do it. You have to find a way to do it. You've got to. It's just so important. And know each other, care about each other, know what makes each other tick. That's what makes it work.
I wonder how differently our classrooms would look if we just set ourselves one challenge, which was to create a moment in time in each lesson where our young people had a deep belly laugh. And I wonder how
Yes.
learning would look different just if that was the
Yeah.
only intention we set for each day we walked into the classroom. I feel like, yeah,
I'd
there'd be
love to get some
wonders.
feedback on that. Let's do some research. If anyone wants to try it, let me know. Do it for a month and tell me how it goes.
Yeah. Jojo, I couldn't imagine a better way to finish our conversation. I took away so much from I mean, time flies when you're having fun. I particularly reflected on the difference between looking to create learning opportunities that are personal rather than personalized. I think that element
Yeah,
of personalized feels like there's a heaviness attached to
yeah,
it,
it
but the
does.
ability to bring the personal to the learner feels like something that I could enjoy bringing into my classroom. I love the notion of us bringing more laughter to our classroom. And I think going back to the foundations, and maybe this is something I'd love to leave our educators with as we sort of close out this year and we use this Christmas break in order to refresh and get ready for the next year. Maybe one space that we can create is what do we want our first lesson with our new learners in 2022 to look like? If the foundations are knowing our young people and creating a space of joy, then how do we be architects of that learning and be really well intentioned in the way that we shape that first learning experience? So rather than walking in with the unit overview and dumping it on the table and telling them how many assessment tasks they've got for the term and when they're all due and when their reporting will be due and pulling out the behavior matrix and telling them what they need to do to get an A for effort and behavior, or pulling out the class rules and slapping them on the desk and telling them what they'll get as a consequence if they don't follow these things. What if we went back to the foundations and we not only shared who we are with our learners and what brings us joy, but we also tried to draw that out from our young people as well. Who are they as learners? What matters to them and what brings them joy? And then rather than filing that lesson away, never to look at it again, we hold it in a space, whether that's digital or physical, that we can continually reflect on and find ways to bring that back into our learning. Um, Thank you for your time, for your wisdom, for joining us jet lagged. And also, how fantastic that you didn't have a check in during our time where you had to photograph yourself. Like,
It's pretty cool. I made it through.
yeah.
Yeah,
Before we jumped on the call, Jojo was sharing that it's 6 times in the last, was it 24 hours? You've had to
24
stand in
hours. Yeah,
certain positions and take photos that are geo-located in order to verify that you are where you are in quarantine. So we got through with
that's right.
45 minutes without having to do that, which is a miracle. Um,
Yeah,
so if there was
yeah.
one final like thought or place, if there was a place that you could send our teachers that are listening, if they're listening to this and they're like, oh my gosh, where do I go next in order to maybe cement or refresh or refine this thinking, where would you send our educators?
At the moment, I just read a report from Brisbane South High School. They've set their school up on the Learner First systems. So I think if you wanted to go and have a look there, Kirsten just sent me a report. I just was reading it. It looks like they've had a really good report. I know it's a brand new school, but they've actually set up on the whole concepts that we've been talking about knowing your learners, about making the programs personal to the learners. And so I think she probably wouldn't mind me saying that. So hopefully she won't kill me for saying that. But I think she just sent the report. So I think go for it. I think that would be a great place to have a look.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
So we'll follow up with today and we'll send everybody links to sort of cover everything that we've sort of touched on. But Jojo, thank you for your
you're
time and your
welcome.
generosity of spirit and bringing so much of yourself to today's conversation. It was such a genuine joy to have you.
Thank you so much. Have a joyful Christmas, everyone.
And to everybody else, thank you for joining us for our last live learning. If you loved today's session, please jump in and sign up for our mailing list so that you know when the next ones are happening next year. All the best for the back end of the year. Please stay safe, look after each other, take things off your plate rather than add things to your plate, and enjoy a well-deserved Christmas break when it arrives. Thank you.